This here is a brand new Garmin Edge 850, a product that takes virtually everything from the Garmin Edge 1050 and plops it into the smaller size device, along with all the new features on the Garmin Edge MTB announced earlier this summer. I've been riding this for the last little while, putting us through its paces across gravel, mountain, road biking, you name it, to see where it works well and where it falls a little bit short. But that'll just simply dive into it. Now, first up on the list is the price. The price on this is $599. Yet again, another new price increase from Garmin, though honestly, I thought it was probably gonna be worse than that, given all of the other crazy prices they've done lately. But yeah, it's definitely more, and it's more than their competitors. It's more than the Wahoo Roam 3 or the Hammerhead Crew 3. Now, I know a lot of people are gonna freak out about the pricing, probably rightly so, but at the same time, it's also worthwhile putting in perspective some of the other options out there. The Wahoo Roam 3 is now $464, and with that in mind, the Hammerhead Crew 3 is $525. And then we've got the Edge 850 at $599. I could see how Garmin would sit there and go, yeah, this is worth 75 more bucks than the Hammerhead Crew 3. There's no question about that in my mind. I think that's a very fair and reasonable additive over the price of the Crew 3. And then if we look at the Crew 3, there's no question it's worth 70 bucks more than Wahoo Roam 3. Like, that's not even close to being debatable at this point in time, given how few features this has on it compared to this, and how well executed the Crew 3 is compared to the Roam 3. So as much as the $599 price sucks, compared to their competitors, it's somehow reasonable. As much as I hate the destination, I understand, again, how they got there. Okay, so take a look inside the box there first. You've got obviously the unit on top there. You got the out front mount, as well as a bunch of standard issue rubber mounts there. You can just kind of slap on your handlebars or wherever you want to put them. Oh, and of course, there's a tether in case you're doing some sketchy stuff. Now, the first real technical thing to know here is they've added a speaker to this. Again, just like the Edge 1050, I won't keep saying that every single time because that's kind of implied here, but they've added a true speaker as opposed to a beeper. The Edge 550, which I'll talk about in a separate video linked in the corner up there, also announced today, does not have the speaker, but has just its previous beeper in the past. The speaker allows it to give actual voice commands for things like when you reach the summit or even upcoming turns, etc. All that can be done through the speaker.
In 150 meters, turn left.
However, the feature that everyone actually cares about is the bike bell. So there's a bike bell that you can see right there. You can just simply tap it, and it makes a bike bell sound. Now, you can tap it on your screen, of course, as you're riding, but far better than that, if you have SRAM access of one of the bonus buttons, is you can assign to that front bonus button up there, and it just dings a bell. And in my experience using both the 1050 bell as well as the 850 bell, people believe it's a real bike bell. It sounds exactly like a real bike bell out in the road, and so it does its purpose perfectly fine. Of course, you could also just buy a bike bell for $3, but you know, what's the fun in that? Now, the next item is a change in the display type from a transflective display to a transmissive display. So transflective display is what you had on the Edge 840 and most other past Garmin Edge devices, versus the transmissive display is what you have on the 1050 and now the X50 series on both the 850 as well as the 550. This has some downsides, and by some I mean a lot of downsides when it comes to battery life, though is far more brilliant in certain conditions because it's kind of acts similar in concept to an AMOLED display, but not the same way. But I will first mention it did increase in size from 2.6 inches to 2.7 inches. Honestly, you don't really notice it too much out on the road, but I'll at least mention that. But when it comes to the battery life, you can see down below on this chart here, things drop to basically a claim spec of 10 to 12 hours of battery life, which is really, really bad compared to all their past units, which did really, really good. Okay, let's talk about how this actually performs in real life. So out on my rides, whether it was gravel or road, it didn't really matter here. I was getting what their spec is, like 10 to 12 hours. And interestingly, it didn't matter whether or not I was doing just free riding or a ride with navigation. And this is with all my sensors paired and stuff like that. So tons of connectivity going in, paired to the phone, etc. It was all in that same 10 to 12 range. You can see these charts right here showing that in my actual data. And that's notable because in the past, Garmin would give these numbers, but then once you add navigation and sensors and all that, it would drop a lot less. But in this case, the battery burner isn't necessarily the processing anymore, it's the display. So for fun, I then went and turned down the display to 30% brightness manually, which was totally fine in like shady scenarios, but was not super great in bright sunny conditions. Normally it manages the brightness level in auto setting, just like the 1050, and it works great just like the 1050 in the auto setting. In any case, if you brought it down to 30%, like typical wintertime riding, if you will, then it basically doubled the battery life that I was seeing to about 20 hours of per charge. It didn't matter whether it's 850 or 550, they act identically in this particular scenario. Now you could also enable battery saver, which would get even more battery life back, but I didn't really want to go down that whole fiasco right now. Maybe that's like a bored winter sort of thing. Now at this point, some of you are like, well, the Roam V3 claims 20 hours of battery life with theirs, thus this is half of that. Except that's not true, and anyone who's ridden Roam V3 knows that. To begin with, the display on this sucks. So in order to get the equivalent level of display on this to 30% brightness on the edges, you have to go full brightness. Not full max, but just full brightness level and always on. So once you do that, the battery life burns at 10% an hour. Now, what's kind of funny here is Wahoo fakes the first hour's worth of the ride. It literally keeps that battery percentage at 100% for the first 52 minutes of the ride every single time, from the moment you press the start button. And then it starts to go down from there. Wahoo says that's because they don't want people to have like battery anxiety, but come on, that's just faking the data. In any case, once you look at the data after that, it's pretty much 10% an hour in that setting. Speaking of that visibility overall, across all my riding, if I was in auto on the Edge 850, 550, it was perfectly fine. I could see it in the shade, I could see it in the sun. There's no real issues there. It's only when I manually pulled that down that it was tough to see in certain conditions, but that's just unfortunately the trade-off we have to make. I'll talk about that trade-off a little later on and whether I think that's the right direction.
Okay, so let's take a look at what happens to the touchscreen in wet conditions. As you can see, it is roughly working. Screen is wet, it was raining out, and so it's kind of working, but it's a little bit sluggish and sometimes doesn't quite do what I want. But the one advantage of the 850 over the 1050 is that it has buttons on all the sides, so you can easily use the buttons for those same operations instead, versus the 1050 you have to use the touchscreen. Thus, point to the cheaper unit.
In any case, something totally different, actually totally different. If you're finding this video interesting and useful, just simply watch it all the way through. I'll get to the battery stuff. There's plenty more to come, and it really does help with this video and the channel quite a bit. As for the other totally different thing, they've added in Garmin Pay, so you can now just tap this thing to, well, not that thing, this thing to make payments just like you would on a Garmin watch. Again, your bank has to be supported, all the same requirements there. The vast majority of the banks in the US are supported. Most of the common banks in Europe are supported. Outside of that, it's kind of who knows. Next, they've also increased the processing power of this to be quite a bit faster. The exact same processor that's in the Edge 1050 is now in the Edge 850. And you see this with map enumeration. So if I just simply scroll around the map and stuff like that, it's way faster than the Edge 840. Route calculation was already pretty heavily improved on the Edge 840. Now it's even faster on the Edge 850 as well, so that's appreciated. Now, also of note when it comes to mapping is they've increased the default storage size here to be 64 gigs as opposed to 32 gigs. That essentially allows you to very comfortably download 2 full contents of stuff. In the past, it got a little bit tight depending which content you wanted and all the additional Climb Pro preloaded kind of data and whatnot. Now you can easily get 2, if not even 3 or 4 continents, depending on what those continents are. You can do that either Wi-Fi or via wired. I still really wish Garmin though would offer smaller downloads of map regions. It's just a giant pain in the butt to download 11 to 15 gigs onto the unit. I just wish I could pick a given country or region like you can on Wahoo and on Hammerhead and on, well, really everyone else except Garmin. Next, they've added 5 Hertz, a 5 times a second GPS recording rate in certain modes. In fact, that actually comes from the Edge MTB, also added to the 1050 over the past summer here. And I'm going to dive into all those new MTB features that came along later in the video here, but I just want to mention that one up front. Next, they've added a new smart fueling feature, and this kind of shows up in a few different places. First off, when you load up a course, you'll then basically see these recommendations on fueling. I'm not really sure what part of this is smart because it basically, like on one of my gravel rides, telling me way less than I should have eaten or drink for that ride. Like it was telling me a trivial small amount of water, considering it was like a 75 to 80 degree day out in the sun. Like a third of a bottle isn't much for me. And the same goes to the fueling. Meanwhile, if I looked at some of the coaching plan stuff they have there, where it loaded up the races that I've defined, the requirements for my hydration and my fueling there were much more in line with reality. So I think there's still some bugs to work out there. Again, it's supposed to use your body, your course, as well as the weather and calculate the smart fueling requirements in real time for that particular ride and give you that advice. Next, they've added new weather overlays onto the map view, or well, the widget map view in particular. So this is very similar to what you've seen in the Garmin Phoenix and some of the other watches for I think like 3 years now or so, where you can go into that weather widget and you can see precipitation, you can see clouds, etc., all there. It's been pretty much sunny here, so it's kind of hard to show this. I'm going to try to find somewhere in the world that's rainy that I can zoom into and show what this looks like for you right now. But that basically is done when you swipe down from the top there. You can see the the weather at any point in time, and it has a little animation just like you'd see like on a weather channel or something like that. That's handy if you're out for a long ride and just kind of want to know what's coming your way. You can do it from the unit itself. Next, if you're using the free Garmin cycling coach to go ahead and get you ready for an event, that's where you put an event in your calendar, including the actual course file, the exact time of day, location, all that fun stuff. Then from there, it'll automatically give you the rides it wants you to do every day or a few days to get ready for that event, and it does it based on a schedule to land you on that particular event. In any case, that feature will now account for the elevation of your race, if you will, that you put on a calendar. So it's going to use that as well as look at your progress towards the goal and keep on continuing to tweak that as it goes along. Likewise, if you use the power guide feature in the past, that's where basically you can load in a given course file and tell it what you kind of want your finish time to be, and it gives you the actual power numbers you should hit the entire time. It'll now account for the heat as well as your acclimation to the altitude. So if you live in the mountains and you're going to a mountain place, then it knows you're going to handle that better. If you live next to the water and you're never in the mountains, then it knows it's going to struggle a little bit more there, and it'll adjust accordingly. Next, a quickie here, they've added a gear ratio analysis after the ride. So you're going to see this in your summary screens. If you have electronic shifting, you can sort it in two different ways there, as you can see right there, back and forth. Next, if you're using the Garmin group ride feature, that's where you organize a group ride on the Edge itself. You send out this code and basically everyone can see everyone else in real time. You can now see the last 5 minutes of averages, and you can see that for heart rate, power, cadence, speed, and watts a kilogram of all the riders. So you can see like how you're doing as a group together and see if, you know, Joe in the back there has just simply dropped off and given up on life. You'll see his heart rate's low now, his power numbers are non-existent, his cadence is struggling, and he's just not with it anymore. Now, before we get some of the accuracy bits and my thoughts on the pricing of the display like as a whole, let's briefly talk about all the new mountain bike features that are added to this. Essentially, if you're familiar with the Garmin Edge MTB unit that was announced this past June, that's a dedicated mountain bike unit that had a bunch of new mountain bike and off-road type features. Those are now all on the Edge 850 as well as 550. They came to the 1050 over the course of the summer as well. I'm going to go through these kind of quick, but I'll just kind of explain them all to you. The first one that I mentioned earlier on is 5 hertz recording, or the 5 times a second recording rate. That is something that will occur when you're going downhill. You're going to see this little purple icon in the upper left-hand corner there that tells you it's in the higher speed recording rate. In all my testing with this, it only shows up in certain scenarios as being useful. Primarily when you have really quick switchbacks like this, where you can cut the corner in traditional 1 second update rates, that's where you'll see it. But in most other scenarios, you won't really notice the difference very much. Next, they've added 3 new sport profiles, activity profiles. They've added the downhill mountain bike profile, they have the enduro profile, as well as the e-enduro profile. In the case of the downhill mountain bike profile, that'll automatically track your runs as you descend and then go back up again. It basically stops the run and shows your kind of lap split. Very similar to what they do on the watches for skiing. So if you've seen that in the last decade or so, it's essentially the same kind of rough concept, but applied to cycling. Versus the enduro profile is a little different in that you're manually switching as you go between ascending and descending, but the same overall concept there in that it's going to track both of those separately. So that means with that enduro profile, you can manually control that for both the lap climbing as well as the descending. Here's what it looks like on the Edge MTB. I haven't used that profile yet on the Edge 850, but it's the exact same thing. Likewise, there's also the new enhanced fork sight feature that was announced on the Edge MTB, giving a little bit more detail into those fork junctions basically that are coming up via trail forks. In my case, I don't really have much trail forks data around me on these trails. Not on this side of the island. The other side has more, but this side just has nothing. It's weird. And if you do have those trail forks trails around you, you'll get the summary data at the end of the ride. Again, what it looks like on the Edge MTB up there, basically showing the time that you spent categorized for each trail type. Now, the last feature to mention here is the timing gates feature. So what this allows you to do is to create these manual timing gates while you're out on the trail. So this is the part that kind of sucks about this. You can't do this in Garmin Connect ahead of time, either the phone or the website. You have to do it on the trail, either walking or riding, and you create it on a given unit. You basically create a start and you create these timing gates along the way. So imagine similar like timing gates in downhill mountain bike course or in ski racing, etc. And you basically define a finish. And then from there, you can race through this and it'll tell you how you compared to your last best split. Now there's a couple of problems with this. Number one is that, again, you have to create it in person. That's because they want you to orient a certain way. So that's kind of a pain in the butt. And then number two, it doesn't compare it between all your previous efforts on other days. It's only to that given day that it's comparing to, which again seems kind of cumbersome. And then finally, in the case of this one test loop that I did here, it worked just fine on the Edge 550, but for some reason on the Edge 850, my starting gate wasn't like correct or something, even though it said it was correct, and it just simply did not trigger that starting gate each time. So that was kind of a pain in the butt. So with that, let's look at the accuracy bits a little bit briefly here. I'll spoil a section and say it's totally fine, but we'll just quickly run through it.
Okay, so starting off on the accuracy, the elevation, here is a ride this morning, including up into the rain, so shifting temperatures, spot on. Here is a road ride in the mountains, also spot on. This time a gravel ride into the mountains, again, also spot on. So then looking at the GPS performance of that gravel ride, it's also spot on. Whether it's ascending or descending, it did not matter. High speed, low speed, all was good. The same goes for this road ride right here, including these tight switchbacks at high speed, descending back down again, also spot on. And also this morning's road ride going up through the redwood forest, and spot on there as well as the high speed descents back down again. As I tend to see, virtually all the cycling GPS units are spot on these days, and high speed or low speed, and trees or mountains, it doesn't seem to matter. And the 850 and 550 follow that pattern as well.
Okay, so with that, where do we stand overall? Well, I think there's a couple things here. One, this is undoubtedly a good unit. I've had very few bugs on this, like very, very few little bugs, just small things I run into here and there, but nothing major, just kind of like, that's odd. But overall, pretty stable, which is good to see. And that makes sense because it's mostly just taking the Edge 1050 software and putting it in a smaller package. The bigger issue, I think, is the display. I'm not really sure what Garmin's thinking here entirely. In the same way, I wasn't sure what Wahoo was thinking when they did this display. But at least in Garmin's case, the display is actually viewable, like visible in all conditions, versus Wahoo's case, this display just sucks. So at least if you're going to sacrifice on battery, they made it so the display is visible. Still, I don't know why Garmin or Wahoo others think that we want 10 hours of battery life. When the battery life was chopped on the Edge 1040 to 1050 series, at least in that case, you were still getting 20 hours of battery life in a normal outside riding with navigation type scenario. And I think for most people, that was fine. Like that was for me fine. I was fine with those trade-offs between brilliance and battery. But when it comes to the Edge 850 and the 550 with it, I'm not sure if those trade-offs are really worth it, to be honest, especially given a higher price point of $600. I think that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. And it's not really clear to me as to why this screen is so much better than the Edge 840 screen. I think in most cases, it feels kind of similar. And so to have my battery be just absolutely slaughtered is kind of tough. Still, setting aside the battery, I do love the bike bell. Bike bell is one of my favorite features. I'm often on this bike path that you see there. It's how I get to most of my rides. I have to ride this little bike path section for a little ways. And it's got two core problems with it, chickens and people. I'm not kidding, actually chickens are a legit problem here. And so having the bike bell is super handy to get both of those groups off. Though ironically around here, most of the time the chickens actually move out of the way faster or even at all compared to the people. So food for thought. Now I will do a separate video comparing the Edge 850 and the 550 and how they differ. So stay tuned for that. But right now, this day is already crazy enough. There's going to be like, I think 7 videos in total dropping today. It is a completely bonkers day, starting off with Garmin, going to someone else, and then finishing with the Apple stuff, new Apple stuff. So hold on to your handlebars. It's going to be a pretty crazy one. With that, have a good one.